Hello YouTube, this is Math Nerd Productions, Visual Basic Lesson 2, Language Basics. Now, unlike Lesson 1, which was just basics, this is more oriented towards Visual Basic rather than overall every programming language. In this lesson, we'll be covering three main things that are basics for any program on Visual Basic, and those three are instance variables, arrays, and the GUI. Instance variables is a data type such as an integer or string that retains its value throughout the life of the form. Now that means that I give the computer a number, say we're using an integer, 5, and sometime later in the program I want to access that, and I'll say I want to add 2 to it. Say there's a button, and when you click the button it adds 2 to the number. So I want that number to stay there and increase every time I click the button. So to do that I need an instance variable which goes with the form, and the reason it goes with the form and not with a method is because when it goes with the form it does not disappear and get garbage collected as soon as the method is done. An instance variable can be modified by any form and accessed by any form at any time, and this is true only if the variable is public. If it is not public, it can only be accessed by its parent form. An instance variable is used to keep track of data from method to method, like I just said before. Instance variables, here's just basic syntax. Public count as integer. Now, public, that is either public or private. If it's public, then any form in the program can use or modify it, and if it's private, then only the parent can modify it, just like I said before. Count, in this case, is the variable name. That can be anything, really anything, as long as it's not one of the special VB words, such as integer, public, private, byval, byref, anything like that. And integer is the data type, and I went over that in more depth in Lesson 1. And if you click on the bottom left, you can go back to Lesson 1 if you need to know what that is. Arrays. I'm not going to go over the syntax of arrays just yet, because they're not that necessary. In most of my programs I don't use arrays, but it's good to know how to use them, what they're for. Arrays basically hold a list of primitive values. Now, if you're familiar with Java or Objective-C, arrays hold objects, but in VB, like I've said before, the form is the class, and you can't have an array of classes in this case. So an array can hold anything from an integer to a string to a double to really any form of data type. An array has no limit to its size, but the bigger the array, obviously the bigger the amount of memory it's going to take up. An array has a defined length. At the very beginning, when you first make an array, you have to define its length. You can always remake the array and make a bigger one with the same name, but you have to define its length when you create it. And an array is an object, but unlike a button or a label, it's not seen on the form. It is outside what the user is able to view and manipulate. The GUI. The GUI is the graphical user interface, and it is the single most important part of VB. I mean, obviously, Visual Basic, the GUI is just really important. It's what defines your program. The GUI is generated at the design menu of a form, and if you've ever opened up any project in Visual Basic, the very first thing it does is take you to Form 1, which is the design picture, and lets you design the window. The GUI has both visible and invisible regions. Now, unlike anything you might be used to, in Visual Basic, it lets you put things off the window. It's like in negative points in space, beyond what the user can really see. When designing a form, everything is visible on the form and will be visible when running, unless the visible property is set to false. And like it says there, we're going to be going over that later when we actually get into showing Visual Basic. I mean, later lessons, I'm actually going to pull Visual Basic video into this. But for now, you really have to understand the lessons and understand the language before we go into anything more project-like. The GUI holds both objects and the form, and is manipulated by the properties of the form. Now, if you look in the bottom right corner of the Visual Basic screen, you'll see the properties. And the GUI is manipulated by those properties, as well as the properties of every object on it. And the GUI, like I said, will be discussed further when we start using Visual Basic. So those are the language basics. Make sure you understand everything I discussed here. And if you need any help or you need anything clarified, just post a comment below or send me a PM. And I will be happy to explain anything you need. And click on the bottom right